This is a special presentation of Dog Nation, unmatched coverage of UGA in the postseason. Brought to you by R.S. Andrews, Kroger, Royal Caribbean, and Georgia Farm Bureau.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in here. A little Friday afternoon breaking news here. Georgia. There we go. Close out of that. Sorry about that. There. Breaking news here into Dog Nation on Friday afternoon. Georgia lands a commitment from defensive lineman Xzavier McLeod. He is out of South Carolina. He will have 4 years of eligibility remaining. He is the second player that Georgia has taken out of the transfer portal. Georgia landed London Humphreys earlier in the week out of Vanderbilt. Sort of brief rundown of McLeod. If you follow Georgia recruiting, you know his name well. Georgia made a very strong push to try and land him in the 2023 recruiting class. Ultimately ends up going to play for South Carolina and Shane Beamer for a year. Played in just 4 games, so he ends up redshirting there, had 1 tackle in those 4 games. It is not a surprise that Georgia has added a defensive lineman here. This is a position where Georgia felt they needed to go out and add talent. You obviously see that in the 2024 recruiting class with them landing 5 defensive linemen in that class there. Joseph Jonah Ajayi, I think, being the most marquee of those names. But in landing McLeod, you go out and add in another veteran body there on the Georgia defensive line, a guy that, while, is going to take some time to get used to the Georgia standard and the way they do things there. The fact that he has 4 years of eligibility left, I think, is a big win for Georgia, that he can continue to grow into a player that fits well into the Georgia system. And, you've heard Kirby Smart talk about the importance of the defensive line. I think that showed up in that game against Alabama at the end of the year, where the defensive line, you think back to Naz Stackhouse maybe getting pushed around a little bit. They were just not only not as talented on this defensive line as they have been in years past, but I think the depth and the lack thereof, it really hurt this team at times this year. I think the key stat to know, we mentioned Naz Stackhouse, who had a good year for Georgia for the most part. He had played more snaps in 12 games this year for Georgia than Jordan Davis did in 15 games during the 2021 season. So in landing McLeod, you get another guy that has played SEC football, obviously not for a long time, but a guy that, because he has that SEC experience, you expect him to be able to come in and fit well for Georgia. They've now landed 5 players out of the transfer portal in the last 2 cycles, and all 5 of them came from SEC backgrounds. Now, Smoke Bowie obviously didn't work out, but I think you like what you saw at times this year from Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas there as well. And so, Georgia, they go into the portal. It's just something Kirby Smart has known that they were going to do. It's not a surprise that they have added via the defensive line. I think they're going to maybe go out there and try and find another defensive lineman if they can go out there and have someone that can fill the role that Georgia is looking for while also having certain level of eligibility requirements left. So if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and ask them. We might not go too long here today, but just breaking the news down of Xzavier McLeod, South Carolina defensive lineman, committing to Georgia, becomes the second transfer defensive lineman the second transfer player to join this Georgia class. London Humphreys committed to Georgia earlier in the week. I don't think Georgia is done in the transfer portal in terms of where they're going. I think obviously the big name everyone is following for at this point, Trevor Etienne, the running back from Florida, entered the transfer portal, I believe, 2 Thursdays ago, and Georgia has been a very consistent name to monitor with him. I think when you consider the fact that Kendall Milton, Dejan Edwards, potentially both going to the NFL after this season, there's a role for Etienne to step into there and come in and play right away. Certainly checks a lot of boxes. Georgia recruited him during, I guess that would have been the 2022 recruiting cycle. And so while, yes, you bring in 3 running backs in the 2024 signing class, Etienne, I think, has proven that he can come in and play at an SEC level and should fit in right away for Georgia with a running back room that does have some questions with the guys coming back. I don't know what you can expect out of Branson Robinson next year as he continues to recover from his patella tendon injury. And then Andrew Paul, he'll be his second year removed from an ACL injury. So I think that's important to monitor as well. Roderick Robinson played in only 4 games this year due to an ankle injury. He ends up redshirting there. So, running back is a position I think Georgia would consider adding at, and I think Trevor Etienne certainly fits there. And then the other name to sort of monitor, Colby Young, 6'5" wide receiver out of Miami, has 1 year of eligibility remaining. I think that's important to note there. But a guy with that size, type of size, production proven at Miami, I think 47 catches, 5 touchdown catches this year for the Hurricanes. Could bring a certain dynamic to this Georgia offense. And we do know, based on what Kirby Smart said at his press conference this week, they are looking to add more depth at that wide receiver room. So I think wide receiver, along with defensive line, is certainly a position there to go ahead and add. Marcellus Flute, no, Georgia is not involved with Walter Nolan. He is a top 2 of Oregon and Ole Miss, and I forget which show I was saying it on. I've been on so many this week. It's been a very, very busy week. There are certain recruitments, whether it be NIL related or whatnot, that Georgia's just not going to win. Walter Nolan was one of those. I think Jacob O'Neal, you bring up Evan Stewart as well. I don't think that's a type of recruitment that Georgia's going to win. It didn't win for him when he was a recruit in the 22 recruiting cycle. I would expect Alabama, LSU, Texas to be sort of the teams to monitor there for Stewart. I think the big name to monitor, if you're looking for more transfer portal additions here, that would be Trevor Etienne, as Josh Thompson sort of brings up there. So resetting things here a little bit, Xzavier McLeod, 4 years of eligibility remaining. I think that's big for Georgia, the fact that you can get a guy that was valued by another SEC program in South Carolina, did go through a year there, but has plenty of eligibility left, can go ahead and develop in your own system. And you saw, the way now Stackhouse got better over the course of his career, Warren Brinson as well. I think Xzavier McLeod can follow in a similar footsteps there, along with potentially maybe even giving Georgia something this season. Defensive line, we're still waiting for decisions from Brinson and Stackhouse in terms of what they're going to do. McLeod's sort of that bigger body guy that can play in the middle there for Georgia. And so I think they're very excited about what they potentially have in him. This was a guy that was very clearly targeted by Georgia from the moment he went into the transfer portal, visited sort of that first weekend after the SEC championship game. And so you bring him in there and he fits a couple of different needs. He obviously can potentially help you out immediately, but also provides long-term depth on that defensive line. They only signed 2 defensive linemen in that 2023 recruiting cycle in Jordan Hall and Jamal Jarrett. And I think Kirby sort of recognized that's maybe not the way they want to go about doing things. They're bringing in 5 guys this year: Joseph Jonah, Justin Green, Jordan Thomas, Namdi Okboko, and there's one that I'm blanking on right now. And then Quintavious Johnson obviously plays sort of that edge position. Nasir Johnson from Dublin, Georgia there. It's important to note, I believe Green and Johnson won't be early enrollees, but Jordan Thomas out of New Jersey, Joseph Jonah Ajanye, teammates with 5-star linebacker Justin Williams out there in Oak Ridge High School in Conroe, Texas. He will be an early enrollee, and then Okboko will be an early enrollee as well out of North Carolina there. So I think, we're going to continue to follow this news. Again, busy week here for Georgia. They signed the number 1 recruiting class in the country earlier this week, 28 commitments, the biggest one, I think, being that late flip in KJ Bolden there. Getting him, I think, was significant for Georgia across a number of reasons there. So I think Colby Culver's 4. I'm assuming this is for the McLeod. Listed by the South Carolina at 6'4.5", 290 pounds. I think if you're Georgia, you maybe like to try and see you can get him up to 300 pounds, but sort of fits that guy, that true big stopper that you have in the middle there of that defense. I know Jordan Davis, obviously 6'6", 350 pounds. He is a truly unique specimen in that regard. And there just aren't a lot of guys out there that can look and play like him, which is why he ended up being a first-round pick, and I think has had a very good year for the Philadelphia Eagles there. But at 6'4", 285, maybe you can get him to bulk up to 300 as he continues to go through the strength and conditioning program at Georgia. You do get, I think, some of the things you're looking for in terms of what he wants from there. Crow King bringing up this in regard to Trevor Etienne. I think Georgia feels very confident with where they are with Etienne at this point in time. Obviously, his brother was a star at Clemson. He is from the state of Louisiana there. But I think Georgia feels very comfortable with where they are with Trevor Etienne in terms of what they're trying to do and what they are looking for from the running back position out of the transfer portal. It's not like I would say wide receiver and defensive line where they're trying to get bodies and guys that they can mold and have multiple years of eligibility. If they can get a player that has star level upside, which I think Etienne does, even though he may not have as many years left in college, I think that is something that certainly they feel very, very comfortable about there. So big news here off the top. Xzavier McLeod commits to Georgia. That is a big win for the Bulldogs there. And before we sort of continue to answer some questions here, we'd like to thank our sponsors here, brought to you today by RS Andrews. RS Andrews stands for Rapid Service. Obviously, if you have any questions about your water heater, obviously the weather time of this year gets kind of cold. That is certainly something to monitor there. Dog Nation depends on RS Andrews, AC, heating, plumbing, and electric. You call, they come. It's fixed, guaranteed. That's because the RS and RS Andrews means rapid service. Take water heaters. RS Andrews makes it easy. Call in the morning, and RS Andrews will take out the old water heater and install a new one the very same day. That's rapid service, and that's RS Andrews, same day water heater replacement. Another reason why Dog Nation depends on RS Andrews. How are they making you smile today? Visit rsandrews.com for more. And so, as RS Andrews makes us smile, I think Xzavier McLeod's commitment makes a lot of Georgia fans smile, certainly makes the Georgia coaching staff smile in terms of what they are getting from him there. And so, I've seen a lot of questions about who else they might take in terms of the defensive line. Again, don't think it's going to be Walter Nolan. He's already named a top 2 of Ole Miss and Oregon. I know, number 1 overall player in that 2022 recruiting class. Certainly fits a need on the Georgia defensive line there. It's just not a position that, and Nolan is just not a type of guy that Georgia lands in that recruitment. I actually think that's part of the reason why winning that KJ Bolden recruitment the other day was such a big statement win for Georgia, because traditionally of late, that has not been the type of player that Georgia has landed there. And so I think to go into Buford, Kaylee Mansell and I talked about it last night on her show, landing a player like that out of Buford, holding off Auburn, holding off Florida State, I think was a big win and a step in the right direction there for Georgia. But in terms of Walter Nolan and any of the Texas A&M guys, I don't foresee that. LT Overton has already committed to Alabama. That was a guy I know a lot of people wanted to see Georgia get involved with. I don't think he was ever coming here. Fidali Diggs, another A&M defensive lineman, he is going to Syracuse to play with Fran Brown and his former defensive line coach, Elijah Robinson there. There is another Texas A&M defensive lineman that just went into the transfer portal. I'm blanking on his name right now, but with what we've seen out of the guys that went to A&M in the first place and the guys that are sort of sticking around there, I don't think that the guys that have gone into the portal sort of fit necessarily what Georgia is looking for there. I see someone asking, how many more portal additions do I expect? Probably 2 more safely. I think if they can push, I know Kirby said earlier this week, they're maybe looking at potentially adding a 4th quarterback. We'll see how that goes in terms of the types of guys they want to try and fit and land in this class. And you think the portal might be an option there. There's certainly a lot of portal quarterbacks out there. But I think Trevor Etienne, the running back, is certainly one to watch there. And then a wide receiver, I think Colby Young has emerged as the most solid target there for Georgia. So I would put the over-under, if we're into gambling here, at 2.5. I'd probably take the under at this point in time. But if another defensive lineman that Georgia likes, certainly like they do Xzavier McLeod, I could see them targeting that position as well there. So let's see. Questions, comments, anything else out there? Let's see. Yeah, Crow King again. Kirby said they wanted to get to 4 quarterbacks. They had that in the 2021 season and the 2022 season. They had 5 in 2020, but this past season they had 3, 18, and they only had 2. It was just Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. 19, they effectively had 2 when Dwan Mathis was ruled out for the year. More often than not, they've had less than 4. And so while I think you understand where Smart comes from in saying wanting 4, Georgia should, in theory, feel good enough about what it has with Carson Beck, Gunnar Stockton, and Ryan Puglisi at that quarterback position there for Georgia moving forward. We'll see, because again, and I think some of this in terms of the concern of getting a quarterback out of the transfer portal is you're not getting a starter out of there because you've got Carson Beck coming back for another year. You're probably not getting a high, a Dante Moore, for example, type player, not him in particular because he's already committed to Oregon, but a guy who is transferring and looking for somewhere to go and be developed because you already have Gunnar Stockton for a few more years. So the type of guy that Georgia is probably really looking for, there just aren't a lot of them out there. And so I think it'll be interesting to me going forward, if Georgia does end up going and finding another quarterback out there, who ultimately that is. And so we'll see what ultimately Georgia decides to do there at the quarterback position. If I had to bet today, I think Georgia is going to be ending up with three quarterbacks next season. Let's see. Yes, and Coulter Ginn, as Mike Brown brings up on YouTube, is the quarterback walk-on from Perry from Perry, Georgia, led Perry to a high school state championship there, had offers from a few G5 programs. So I think to get a talent like that, I think certainly helps out there as well. We'll maybe do a few more comments and questions here. Asa Owen, because there have been some questions about the USC guys. Obviously, Corey Foreman going into the transfer portal, former number 1 overall player in the 2021 class. I know Damini Jackson, a cornerback from USC, has been a guy that has been asked about a lot, especially after Georgia brings over Dante Williams to be the new defensive backs coach. I don't expect Georgia to land either of those guys. With Jackson in particular, I've heard Michigan and Alabama mentioned as a school for him. When you look at the cornerback position, Georgia feels very good about with what they have. They bring in Ellis Robinson, the number 1 cornerback in the country. You bring back Dalen Everett, Julian Humphrey, even if Kamari Lassiter goes to the NFL draft as expected. Kamari Lassiter is going to be at the Orange Bowl. We are going to get a chance to talk to him. So I think that is a positive step in terms of, expecting bowl guys there and opt-outs. Most of the guys that you had questions about, Ladd McConkey, Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint, those guys are going to be down there. The only one that has not officially been confirmed yet is Brock Bowers, but we should find out next Monday on the 26th when the team gets down there, sort of who is down there, who's going to be playing and whatnot. So I certainly think that's something to watch there as well. As far as Corey Foreman, I just don't know if he's going to be a fit at this Georgia program. And so we'll see there about where things are going forward. So I think when you look at this Georgia team as a whole, 28 signees now. I believe, if I'm doing the math correctly here, 98 scholarship players right now when you factor in the commitment of Xzavier McLeod, which came in this afternoon. They're going to have to continue to see some attrition here on the roster. Obviously the draft guys have to make their decisions still. When we got a chance to talk to Tyke Smith this week, he said he's saving that for after the Orange Bowl. It sounds like a lot of guys are doing that. And so you're going to see some guys head to the NFL draft. You're probably going to see some more portal guys. You saw Joshua Miller enter the transfer portal on Wednesday. He's the most recent Georgia player to do so. In total, they've seen 18 guys enter the transfer portal at this point. Georgia now has 2 commitments of their own, 3 if you want to count walk-on long snapper Bo Gardner from UCLA, who Georgia picked up last night. But Georgia very excited to get a guy in Xzavier McLeod who fits and checks a lot of boxes that they look for, not just from transfer portal guys, but from defensive linemen as well. And so I think this is another good sign for Georgia. In total, they now have 30 new players coming into the program this year on scholarship, 28 signees from the high school ranks, and now 2 transfer portal players. And I don't think Georgia is done yet after adding Xzavier McLeod, a defensive lineman from South Carolina. We'll see, if and when an ETN announcement happens, if and when a Colby Young announcement happens, we'll try and go live with you guys. Of course, knowing the way this business works, it wouldn't surprise me if one of those guys decided they wanted to commit on Christmas. That's just sort of the way things go this type of year. So we'll keep you guys updated. Before we head on out, I want to say thank you to our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Georgia Farm Bureau provides support to all Georgia communities through important local ag programs and by offering affordable home, auto, and life protection. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. With agents, volunteers, and members in every community in the state, Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. Learn more at gfbinsurance.com for our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau there. Big news today. Georgia lands Xzavier McLeod, defensive lineman out of South Carolina, 6'4", 290 pounds, a guy that I think can come in, both continue to grow and get better, but also has a chance to make an impact early next year for Georgia. They needed help on that defensive line. I think the game against Alabama showed that. Getting a guy like McLeod, in addition to the 5 defensive linemen they signed in the 2024 recruiting class, I think helps you there as well. I also think if Georgia's able to get back Warren Brinson and Nas Stackhouse for another year, that would be a tremendous boost to this defensive line in terms of what they get next year. So we're going to continue to keep you guys updated on the news. Big news today, Xzavier McLeod joins the Georgia class, their second player out of the transfer portal. We'll probably be back in the next couple of days, or we'll see you on Monday. Or I guess Monday is Christmas. I hope I don't see you guys on Monday. No offense. But we'll continue to keep you guys updated. Xzavier McLeod, a Georgia Bulldog now after the Bulldogs first missed out on him in the 2023 recruiting class. They get their guy. They add another SEC player via the transfer portal, and the Bulldogs continue to add and build up for what should be a very, very fun and interesting 2024 season. My name is Connor Riley. This has been a Dog Nation postseason production.